General Motors just put a hard number on what many in the auto industry have quietly acknowledged for months. The all electric transition is proving far more expensive, complicated, and politically exposed than its earlier champions predicted. I predicted that, and this is just proof that you have to look at the bottom line and then make decisions. But the company announced it will take a $7.1 billion loss in what they call special charges as it reshapes its electric vehicle production footprint, a move that underscores how turbulent the road of electrification has become, even for the largest and most experienced automakers. This disclosure follows closely on the heels of Ford's admission that its aggressive EV push resulted in roughly $20 billion in losses, and we have covered that. The difference between the two companies is not the size of the miscalculation, but the response. Ford is pulling back timelines and recalibrating expectations. Stellantis is doing the same, but General Motors under CEO Mary Barra is choosing to absorb the financial pain and press forward. According to GM, $6 billion of the charges are tied directly to changes in its EV manufacturing strategy. That's a lot of money, and including canceling supplier contracts and unused equipment that was originally slated for electric vehicle production. An additional $1.1 billion related to the restructuring of GM's China joint venture, a reminder that global market pressures are compounding the challenges of EV transition. When combined with an earlier October 2025 filing that foreshadowed losses tied to the abandoned EV plans, General Motors will take an accounting for roughly $7.6 billion in losses connected to its pivot away from certain electric vehicle production efforts in 2025 alone. Now, these charges will appear in General Motors' fourth quarter results, scheduled for release January 27th. And they raise unavoidable questions about whether Detroit's largest automakers misread the pace of consumer adoption, the resilience of charging infrastructure, and the staying power of government incentives. Mary Barra, however, remains unapologetic. Speaking with the automotive press, she said she has no regrets with GM's EV strategy. In her view, the disruption caused by regulatory changes in 2025 outweighed even the impact of the tariffs. But GM's ability to quickly reorganize its production footprint helped limit the damage to the company's bottom line. That statement reveals how deeply policy-driven this transition has become. Automakers are no longer responding only to market demand, but also to shifting regulatory targets, incentive structures, and geopolitical realities. Barra also has been clear that while the company will be more pragmatic in execution, its long-term destination has not changed. GM's electric vehicles, she insists, remain the company's North Star. The difference now is the acknowledgement that the journey will take longer and the cost more than originally promised, particularly as incentives fade and infrastructure gaps persist. Customers aren't buying them, but they're still making them, which makes no sense. And this is where the disconnect between policy ambition and consumer behavior becomes impossible to ignore. Despite years of aggressive marketing, subsidies, and regulatory pressure, consumer demand for EVs has cooled. General Motors' fourth quarter EV sales fell 43% year over year to just 25,219 vehicles. That is not a rounding error. That is a sharp signal from the market that affordability, charging convenience, and long-term ownership costs still matter more to buyers than political timeliness. But at the same time, the full-year picture tells a more complicated story. GM's total EV sales for 2025 rose 48% to 169,887 cars, making it the second best-selling EV manufacturer in the United States behind Tesla. That statistic allows GM to claim momentum, even as the quarterly results expose volatility. It also highlights how uneven EV adoption remains, with the spikes driven by incentives and fleet sales rather than by steady organic demand. The China-related charges add another layer of complexity. China, once seen as the cornerstone of global EV growth, but regulatory uncertainty, local competition, and geopolitical tensions have made it a far less predictable market for the American automakers. GM's decision to restructure its joint venture there reflects not just on EV headwinds, but a broader reassessment of international risk. What makes GM's position especially noteworthy is the refusal to abandon the all-EV narrative, even after acknowledging billions of dollars in losses. Barra has emphasized that once charging infrastructure becomes more robust, EV adoption will accelerate. I don't see that happening, especially with cold weather, which slows the charging and frustrates consumers. Now, that may be true as far as they're seeing it, but it assumes infrastructure expansion will keep pace without the same level of government incentives that initially fueled the growth. It also assumes consumers will remain patient as prices stay high, insurance prices are higher, and technology continues to evolve. From an industry perspective, GM's write-downs are less about failure and more about timing. Automakers were pushed both politically and culturally to commit early and loudly to electrification. Those that hesitated were criticized as out of touch, and that would include me. Now the cost of being first is becoming clear. Retooling factories, securing battery supply chains, retraining workers, and complying with shifting regulations require enormous capital. And those investments do not disappear simply because demand softens. There is also a credibility issue at stake. When executives say they have no regrets after multi-billion-dollar losses, consumers and investors alike are entitled to ask whether lessons are truly being learned. Pragmatism going forward is a necessary adjustment, but it raises the question of whether early forecasts were driven more by political alignment than by realistic assessment of consumer readiness. GM's experience should serve as a cautionary tale for policymakers as well. Mandates and incentives can accelerate innovation, but they cannot force market acceptance on a fixed timetable. The EV transition will happen, but not on command and not without detours and not without choices for consumers. There has to be multiple choices. The companies that survive will be those that balance ambition with flexibility and multiple engine choices, rather than those that lock themselves into rigid promises. For General Motors, the next few years will test the balance. The company has to scale engineering talent and brand equity to compete in an electrification future. That won't be the full future. We already know it's going to be a mix of gas, hybrid, and electric. That's the only way it's going to work. But it cannot afford to be continuing misaligning itself between production plans and real-world demand. The $7 billion charge is not just an accounting adjustment, it's a public acknowledgement that the road to an all-electric future is longer, bumpier, and far more expensive than advertised and may never happen. Consumers, meanwhile, are watching closely. They are not rejecting electric vehicles outright, but they're certainly looking at their options. Some people are still buying Teslas. Some will look at other brands. Some won't buy EVs at all. But they're demanding better value, better infrastructure, and honest timelines if they're even considering an EV. If automakers and regulators listen to those signals instead of dismissing them, the transition may ultimately succeed. I'm not predicting that. But if they do not, GM's $7 billion reckoning may prove to be only the beginning. If you like this video, give it a like and subscribe for more videos like this, and check out our car review channel, Car Smarts. You can support me by buying me a cup of coffee, and if you want even more content, check out the links in the description. I'm Lauren Fix. Thank you so much for watching.